Okay.
All right, welcome everybody. I'm Mercury Black, the lunatic host of Sorting Myself Out, and today I'll be talking with Guy and Gregg. Just to say why I'm so interested in talking to these two individuals is there's plenty of people with interesting ideas out there, but I've noticed that both Guy and Gregg, what they've discovered actually changed their lives, and it seems that the things they enjoy talking about have profoundly affect how they live and has made them better people. Those are the kinds of ideas I find most fascinating, the ones that are actually being lived. And I think anyone who knows me realizes that the beliefs I talk about affect every moment of how I live my day. I see the same thing in both of these individuals. So I'm curious to see what happens if the three of us practice circling together. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves, or do you just want to dive into it and people can look up who you are if they don't know?
Yeah, I imagine if they gotten this far and are watching this video, they probably know enough.
Right.
If not, they can pause it and Google.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah,
That sounds
absolutely.
good.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested in us discussing what's going on, and from that open-minded perspective of being aware of what we don't know. On the larger scale, something seems to be going on now, which, Gregg, you've got an excellent discussion on. Also, I notice on my personal level, the idea that just by changing, not asking why is this being done to me, but always asking why is it being done for me, made me realize that in my own personal life, there's something going on I didn't understand before. And possibly it's entirely good. And as I move towards it, it seems to define itself more and more as good. I think this mirrors as within, so without. And so I want to explore that. How does the future reach back and communicate with us now? How does how we frame things now change the past? And how does that reveal a process worth participating in?
Wow. That's great. Yeah. In fact, right before we hit record, I'll just summarize a little bit of what I was really moved by, which was your narrative about, how when life comes at you, you have learned over the years to make that transition in your frame of mind, which is the natural reaction, I think, that we would cultivate is a defensive, why is this happening to me? And that makes perfect sense. You get hurt, you pull back, you want to look and try to defend. But the ways in which people so often respond, myself included, defensively to the potential injury as we try to resist and control, that can so often lead to reactivity that then engenders more and more hostile friction and resistance. Okay. So I loved the idea that you could have the fortitude, the insight, the mindfulness, and the presence to switch that to why is this happening for me? All right. And I believe that intersection between that moment, the present, the past, and the future, that reframing of the whole of the situation that you are in, that word change from to me to for me is a really, really dramatic shift in mindset across actually a whole host of different potentialities. And I would love us, and I actually really do hope, and we can get into some of this, if we now go meta or macro, I really hope the United States is asking that question right now, okay? And maybe the globe. And what I mean by that is, of course, we're facing the pandemic. Of course, there's all this racial strife, tension, confusion. The United States is in the process, I think, of losing a lot of its place in the world. And so at one level, you could get really resentful and bitter. But I actually also believe there is a silver lining playbook notion in relationship to this, at least at the potential level. And if we listen to ourselves and say, well, why is this potentially happening for us? Well, the potential for the future and our relationship to the future is really very dramatically different than if we all get anchored into our own bitterness and feel, why is this happening to me? And why are other people doing what they're doing to me? So I'll offer that thought maybe as we get this conversation rolling.
I mean, there's a sense of where you know, it's interesting to kind of think about. I mean, I keep being, like you could say, struck by how much I keep discovering what being human is to be so futural, right? Like
Mm,
it's like I mean, I just keep seeing that more and more and realizing it more and more and more is that there's a real um, sense of I only already find myself moving what I perceive is possible to move towards, right?
mm,
There's a, even in my prehensions, right?
mhm.
So for example, I like to use the example of, you know, I haven't thought, none of my mental movement has gone towards thinking about walking through the wall, right? Without breaking through it, right? Like, because it just is not, it's not, it just is not a possibility. However,
Right.
if somehow in this conversation, right, somehow the possibility that that was possible could open up, I guarantee you that's all I'd be thinking about afterwards, right?
Mm,
Like everything would move towards that.
mhm.
And so I think there's a way in which that sense of the future, right, is revealed in our, and this is one of the things that Heidegger really kind of gets into, which is we are always in response, right? And I think you would say we're always in a response to um, that which is opening itself to us, and we find ourselves already on the way towards. So
Mhm.
that there's a way in which the future is really like, I think, phenomenologically uh, is so present,
Yep.
right, in all of our preconceptions of what is or isn't possible, or you know, in the way that the world discloses. There's always this already on the way towards something,
Yep.
um, and so I think it's in my experience, this is one of the big mysteries for me. Has always been, right, and I think you even talked about it. You know, when you're Mercury, when you were talking about um, you know, this sense of this sense of getting a, like, something flashes that seems good and you start moving towards it, and then you learn about the thing that you're moving towards and why it's good.
Mm,
Right, but
mhm.
what, how did you know to even be able to see it and be in response to it if you didn't understand already that it was on some level good,
Right.
right? And I think everything, and why that struck out to me is because everything in my life that I call really impactful and meaningful always started off with this sense of like, I'm going along, and then something reveals, some new horizon opens up, and I find my interest and my energy move it, like
Mhm.
struck by it,
Mhm.
and then I spend 20 years, right, like moving towards it and discover what it was that on some level was revealed to me that I didn't understand, right? I discover in some sense the origin of that interest, right?
Yep.
And almost everything in my life that's super meaningful is started off that way.
Mm,
And so the big mystery I've always wondered about is how, like, how did I know, right? Like, what was that flashed to me? What does that say about what is that, what does that reveal about our way of being, right, in
mhm.
the world? And how does that exactly happen, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, go ahead, Mercury.
Was just gonna say, and the how is interesting, but for anyone who hasn't like experienced that yet, that's not the important thing. Like you don't need to know how to
Mm,
ride a bike in the sense of
mhm.
describing it. The interesting thing is just that that phenomenon's there, and it's easier to walk that path than it is to describe how it happens. So I just
Right.
wanted to throw that in there, not to discourage everyone that if we dive deep into theories of how it happens, the how doesn't matter. All that really matters is it works. Just
Yeah,
like cooking meat, You don't need to know how it happens. It's better to eat after.
Yeah.
Just cook the meat. It's simple.
Right.
And so what you discovered there, it's like, as if you observe the process of your life and actually like think about it, you realize that somehow meaning shines to you from the future. It suggests possible goodness, and that as you proceed, goodness is revealed, which begins to suggest, okay, perhaps life is worth living. Perhaps it is worth participating. Perhaps this is good. The difference for me is that I didn't discover it by living the pattern. I discovered it by having psychotic breaks, having an angel come to me, the angel telling me, look, this is how reality works. And then, so I was given the map ahead of time, so that as I walked and practiced it, and so I developed that question from, how do I live the information my angel's telling me? So my angel's telling me everything is good. How do I live that? And examining closely, I was looking for where I wasn't living it. And I realized every thought that is how wise is being done to me is me not understanding my angel. Like, I'm not acting as if that's true if I'm asking that question. So that was when I realized I had to rewrite that question. And that was probably 7 years ago now, roughly, that I rewrote that question. And now, living it for 7 years, I now have the same as you. I can look back on all of it. I can see, I can begin to explain what it does. But it came from the point of view of, okay, assuming this axiom to be true, how would I interact with reality? And the axiom simply being that God is good. The game is worth playing.
Right. And that gave you that framing, that gave you the strength to relate then differently with hope and investment in path. And I will say that, you know, for me, and this is sort of a natural to spiritual kind of linkage, so it's very naturalistic, but I believe that we can usefully move into a mythic spiritual notion with it. And I argue that actually the body, and in particular brain, is this behavioral investment system. Okay, so people talk about the organ of behavior. It's really the organ of behavioral investment. All right. And that's a big difference, subtle, but big, because what it basically says is that what it's trying to do is trying to predict the path, okay, of energy flow. That's what it says. So looking for path of energy flow, you know. And I think one of the things about us humans is that our capacity to extend that path in time and the giving rise to then you know, and ultimately giving rise to spiritual possibilities is much of what constitutes, you know, the meaning making task, or what Frankl might call the will to meaning, and how to craft that process.
Okay, but doesn't this also happen even in your like your tree? I forget the diagram, the cones. It's like for a period, as matter was evolving, it did it in such a way as if the future was telling it to evolve to set up for life, yet I don't think it knew at that stage it was preparing for that.
Right. Well,
life evolved. It evolved in such a way as if it was moving towards mind, yet it didn't know it was.
That's
mind moved to culture. So there seems to me to be a natural process going on everywhere that's fractal. It's as within, so without, everything, right from the Big Bang exploding out, which would mean each of our personal cones, our personal evolution of our own consciousness is a participatory part of what began with the Big Bang. It's a part of the same thing moving. And since we're now at this new crest, and like you said, how can society now learn to ask questions differently? It seems to me this is already happening. Like, I'm not looking to shape anything like the Taoist. I'm just looking to woo way through this. But it seems to me, and I call it an apocalypse, something new's emerging and we're going to do one of two things. We're either going to destroy ourselves, so it'll be an Armageddon type apocalypse, or we have to usher in some sort of golden age, some next level enlightenment, the new integral thinking from Ken Wilber's perspective. So what do you two think about what's happening in the world naturally, and how are we naturally participating?
Right. That's a great question.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for me, so just to know my history and where I am in sort of cosmic sense making, I grew up in a sort of a new atheist household in terms of, science and a fairly mechanistic view of the universe, and certainly very skeptical of any Christian version of reality. My dad actually was an evangelical for a while, and then the light went out, and he got his doctorate in history. And I was raised as a naturalist, and really for a little while a physicalist, and then I've emerged into what I consider I'm a naturalist. I'm an atheist with regards to any specific claims about the nature of God. So I'm without belief in a knowable theism. I'm agnostic with regards to the ultimate nature of the universe and reality. I'm a syntheist, which means that I now believe and embrace the concept of God, okay, as sort of aligning my spiritual light with the ultimate concern and ultimate goodness. So that's just where I am. I will tell you that in terms of when I have these various voices in my head. There's the scientific naturalist voice, okay, and then there's the spiritualist humanist voice, and I have conversations with those. When I discovered the tree of knowledge, when I wrote it out in 1997, just drew it out in 30 seconds, okay, that was a really spiritual moment for me. I wrote about it with John Vervaeke. I was in a transcendent kind of state. It's so weird that I both saw it fresh for the first time, and essentially also remembered it. Okay, meaning that it seemed to be a part of me, something that I've known all my life. Okay. And then to get into why I feel, here's some other magical spiritual elements. So within 6 months, certainly, and I think even within 6 weeks, but definitely within 6 months. So the upside down cones of the tree of knowledge, the matter, life, mind, and culture, tell you that what's happening with life, mind, and culture, each of those is a new plane of existence. Okay, that's what they say. And where does a plane of existence come from? Well, in very naturalistic language that it offers, it is a plane of existence that emerges as a function of information processing, self-organization, and communication. Okay, so cells have DNA and RNA. They have ways of detecting forms, and then they communicate with other cells, and then boom, you get the emergence of plants and bacteria and life. Okay, and all of that dynamic interrelation is very different than what's happening at the level of just atoms and planets, right? And then what you get is you get animals moving around, and what's happening there is the nervous system is connecting all these cells together, and it is an information processing system, and you get animal-animal communication, and that gives rise to cats hanging out with each other and chipmunks, right? You know, okay, and all of that, and they're behaving radically differently than plants, okay? And then you get minds talking to each other, okay, and processing symbolic information and engaged in language communication. So we then build these storied narratives of culture, right? And that allows us to be people who can do this. And then, but I saw that, of course, in the 20th century, we had laid down computers, we had laid down the internet, and we were really starting to build artificial intelligence systems that we would interface with, all right? So we had built a medium, and so what I could see that we were like is before what's called the Cambrian explosion. That's really when the animals emerged on the evolutionary trail about 550 million years ago. Before that, there were things like jellyfish, okay? So jellyfish have distributed neural nets, but not a centralized control system, all right? So what I saw us as a sort of like the jellyfish of the 20th century. So the internet was like jellyfish, right? We had these but not a centralized control system. Okay. Somewhere in the 21st century, there would be a centralized control system in terms of the material, digital, electronic, and then human interface with that. You know? And the key to get to that, in my estimation, is that we have to fuse that with wisdom. Okay. If we just build this thing, okay, first off, it's going to be very chaotic because it's a whole nother level of organization. And I think that's what we're experiencing right now. All right. I also think it's very dangerous because it can set the stage for us to be very controlled by it and turn into robots and I think there's a hell potential. And I think there's a real heaven potential, a real fusion of this higher order of being if we do it right, you know? And so that's what the calling is. It's a calling to be wise with the new technology and the potential of an emerging God above us.
Yeah.
And so how do we align our spirit with that?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'll say one other thing that really blew my mind in terms of my naturalistic mind. There's a thing called the singularity that people have noticed, right? Ray Kurzweil, who was second in charge of Google, said that it was, 2045. He talked about it in terms of artificial intelligence. There's a Russian theorist who found a whole different set, Russian data points, curves the exact same curve. And he corrects Ray Kurzweil's exponential, which actually it's an exponential on an exponential. And these two curves are two totally different data sets. They cross between 2027 and 2029 with a correlation that's like 0.994 and 0.996 on the curve. Okay, it's unbelievable. I show you so I saw this and I'm like, that for me is spiritual. I mean, it's like, there's some awakening of complexity that's crossing over a particular dimension that's laying itself down, right as, then I feel very much a part of it. You feel a participant in the universe of awakening in a particular way. And, that rocks my world and gets me up in the morning and says, hey, there's the past naturalistic view and the potential future spiritual view. And how do I line my soul and spirit with that is much of what my quest is.
Yeah. There's a sense in which when you talked about the investment, what was that you said about what did you link
it's
that
called
to?
Behavioral investment theory.
Right.
Okay. It's the direction of your action energy and
Yeah.
how to navigate that in the field of the environmental field of commerce, actually. So the environment is bringing you affordances and stressors,
Right.
and you have to then guide the investment of your action in a particular kind of way.
And so even like in that sense of just, I can hear it in just the sense of investment, right? Already has this ecstatic quality to it, right? Of on some level, the organism, right, is in some way already feeling into what isn't here and
Yes.
making investing itself and making an investment. So it's like there's something I could hear it in that,
Yeah.
right? And I think what you also said, I heard it too, when you said you had a naturalistic spiritual awakening in realizing this telos, and it's interesting because I think that there's something about. I mean, this is where my attention goes with that is like there's like what that sense of this coming together and realizing this, right, kind of folds back in, right, about, well, what was it about all of this that can allow for that possibility?
Right.
Something about that kind of like there's an orientation towards a future that's coming that's also lighting up that this what was here is already in some way allowed for its possibility.
Totally.
And I would say that sense of attuning into what isn't just a pure positing, right, of what's present in a kind of an atomistic way,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is the kind of the technologization of everything, including science, right? I don't think science is a technology, but like the sense of what it means to be I think what Heidegger was pointing out as in the age of technicity or the age of technology
Mm-hmm.
is that it seems to have this characteristic, right, of where it can only see and understand its own positing, right? So there's this quality of like a point of point, and this quality of technology is about extracting the resource out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to not be awake to, or it just doesn't have it in its hyper technologization.
Mm-hmm.
It can't hear concealment,
Mm-hmm.
right? It can't hear that which withdrawals
Mm-hmm.
or telos.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that seems to be increasing, right, through time. I mean, exponentially. And I think there's that sense of like, as it exponentially grows in this way, because it's kind of taken over our understanding of being. And I think this is Heidegger's point, right? Is the understanding of the horizon of horizons, right?
Mm-hmm.
That historically our understanding of that, which has determined everything that we've done and how everything occurs, um, you would call this the history of the history of metaphysics, basically,
Right.
is the more into seeing what's revealed and not seeing what withdrawals, right, in allowing for that to be revealed.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like the object has gotten
Mm-hmm.
so much so to
Yep.
where we actually start to see being itself or understand being itself as a resource to optimize, including ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that by virtue of which makes that climb on a technological level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think you're also seeing, like when you talked about wisdom, right? Well, wisdom, it's interesting because like wisdom has this always, Socrates really elucidated this. Like wisdom is not something that you can possess, right? It's
Right.
like
Be wary of anybody who claims it.
right, totally. It's precisely the thing that, if anything, you can't possess, right? But you can attune into it, right? But it's very difficult to posit what wisdom is, right? In some kind of atomistic way.
Right.
It seems to elucidate that.
Right.
So we have this on one level, we have this kind of technologization or understanding of being that's like gaining its momentum, including our sense of our mind and our bodies. Like we even view ourselves as something to hack, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is also simultaneously, because it's taken over to such a degree, you've also loses the ability to perceive and relate to um, that teleotic sense, that thing that awakens, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing that can anticipate like the what isn't here but is worthy of investment,
Mm.
and to bring that into out in that concealment and have it be present.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the loss of religions and the loss of I think religion is one of the ways that has been preserved, right? That mystery or that telos has been preserved. It's kind of on some level as, you know, makes that beyond the horizon, right? Disclose in everything that we do, right?
Mm.
I think the technologization is like with all of that kind of going away.
Mm-hmm.
I think those two things, that as this goes up, our wisdom, our ability to grasp wisdom, right, starts to go down.
That's my fear. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So why is that being done for us?
Mm-hmm.
What's the opportunity in that? Instead of looking at that
Mm-hmm.
as that's what technology did to us, it
Yep.
robbed us of our wisdom. Why was
Mhm.
that done for us?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Well, I could say that one of the things that Heidegger says, right, around this, he's like in in the greatest, I think this is, he actually quotes Holderlin, a poet, and he says, within the greatest danger is also the saving power, right? So that there's something about our right relationship to technology, a free relationship to technology, right, is really, really essential. And he says that you know, Techne is a mode of revealing, right? That there's something in there, right? Like that if we can start to, I would say that we can start to hear it in its withdrawal, right? And I think some of the responses, like this very conversation, I think John's work on the meaning crisis, your work with the tree of knowledge, it's on some level it's a response to this, right? It's a response to this. So I would say, what is it for? I think it's to begin to recover ourselves from it, right?
If we answer the question that way, I think we got a chance, right? Okay, so I hope that it becomes for our souls, you know, as opposed to, I hope it becomes a way to escape or control, right? You know, and that to me that's both the danger and the opportunity that's embedded in this moment in relation. You know, I think there is enormous opportunity for, but I also think it's enormous opportunity to destroy and to control and to alienate. So finding that right relation, that's what I meant. That's exactly the way I would say. I don't know how to do it, but if my intuition for wisdom is, it's what's the right relation to this moment here? What is the right relation to this emergence? That's what we need to be very open to and reflective about.
So I can see two things it does for us. One is absence makes the heart grow fonder. And perhaps at certain points, humanity could take its connection to soul for granted to a certain degree. So it's been removed so that we can miss it, because you don't search for something that you don't miss or desire. The other is, I see that we've done the Osiris myth, or we've dismembered the shaman, and this again is solving coagula. Once all of culture was the domain of the shaman, and we cut him up into segments. So it became art, religion, you know, science comes out of alchemy. We separated medicine. We took all the components of the shaman, separated those. Well, after that, we allowed each segment to evolve. We improved each segment.
Exactly.
We now have the opportunity to coagulate. And this would bring in, like, it's like Ken Wilber's thoughts. At a certain point, you realize it's all integral. You're okay, we've developed a bunch of organs. We can put it back together into a whole. And we might actually be motivated to do so now that we miss having a sense of meaning. Brilliant. And I would bring in also just the, you know, the theme of The Day the Earth Stood Still, to quote some science fiction. It's only on the precipice of destruction that we can truly change. Or, fuck, I forget his name. We keep calling him Taobeard. Daniel Schmachtenberg.
Schmachtenberger,
Okay, he says the same thing about with the caterpillar or the bird in the egg. Like, or the baby in the womb. It's only at the moment of crisis. If it stayed in longer, the mother would die. Or, you know, the chick would die inside. But if it came out earlier, the baby would die, or the chick wouldn't be formed enough. So whatever's supposed to evolve next, it seems that the pattern of reality is that true transformation only occurs on the precipice of disaster.
Right.
And so,
well, what you said there, I definitely want to riff off for a second, because that's exactly when you talked about the shaman and the splitting. Okay. And what, so if I translate that into the language of the tree of knowledge and unified framework. So capital C culture, the fourth dimension, really what that holds, the purity of the capital C culture are the systems of justification we humans build. Okay. And it used to be that in the oral traditions, you were exactly right, the shaman held the meaning making systems and the rituals and the patterns, and they would be the wisdom traditions that the oral people would go to, you know, that the everyday oral indigenous processes, and then they would consult, and you would have the pre-shaman wisdom holders. And then modern, really pre-modern formal cultures came along, civilization, and then in particular with modernism, and then modernism breaks off science in particular, okay, and then feeds science, and Ken Wilber really makes this point, and grows the science tree, okay? And it not only does it grow, but it then splinters and fragments. And so we get all of this elaboration of these systems of justification, but they grow inside of them, they're great, but they also are completely chaotic in many ways. And so they sprout all of these different places. And another channeling of wisdom is to try to find the ultimate metacultural justification points, integral points that hold the pluralism, but also have a center, okay? So for me, for example, I landed on an ultimate justification that guides me, which is called be that which enhances dignity and well-being with integrity, okay? And what that really represents is dignity is sort of beauty and value, and each of us and our existence holding the beauty and value of each of us. Well-being is happiness with the worthiness to be happy, to quote Kant. Okay, it's feeling good with the worthiness to feel good. Okay, and I built a model of what well-being is, and integrity is honor, honesty, and truth. And I found that, and that really can be represented as the scientific enterprise. And together, that's beauty, goodness, and truth. And the question fundamentally is that how do we get back to hold all of the advances across all of the different domains that modernist society and the Techne that has emerged? Is there a way, though, to bring back and integrate from a meta level so that we gain a dialectic between integration and pluralism? And so that we can then have a shared lodestar and a shared way of communicating, because right now the chaotic fragmented pluralism is driving the meaning crisis and causing so much craziness.
The justification part of it, right? The thing that has us become persons, right?
Yep.
You're talking about. You know, it's interesting. Would you say, I was wondering if this maps over, right? Because one of the things I notice about technology, right, is that it's got a quality. If you and this is kind of coming out in the news and stuff like that. You see it on Facebook and Google and with all the stuff where it doesn't seem to go through that process where, like, surveillance and making something faster. It's almost like it seems to not have to justify itself in where it's going. It's almost like it's funny. It's not even like that there's somebody that's not asking for the justification.
Right.
It seems like that there's something about the nature, and I think this is really a fundamental difference between, like, even the Industrial Revolution, right? This kind of mode is a very different mode.
No, it's a very, absolutely. So I divide society up into these four domains.
Yeah.
One is capital C culture, which is our systems of justification.
Yeah.
Okay. Two is our practices of behavioral investment, like knowing how to play basketball. Okay. That's a practice of behavioral investment. Three is our material culture technology. So these are all initially the tools that we build. And then four, we're embedded in a biophysical ecology. Together, that which makes up a society civilization. Okay. So what we did, what's happening right now is the digital technology is starting to take a life of its own. Okay. It used to be when we just had a hammer, it was contained with our hammer, and the tool and technology was an extension of our investment system. Okay. When we started to write, that was the first step. So what we did is we externalized our memory and fused our justification and technology and created an externalized memory. That was actually the first step in digital. Okay. Then when we got to mathematics, and then when we got to ultimately algorithms, and then electronic algorithms, now we built an information processing system that had a degree of autonomy. Okay.
Right.
So that's and now all of a sudden we're starting to fuse our human with an extended autonomous Techne system. That's what information processing did. Okay.
Right.
And that's the evolution of it. Then we built computers and the internet, which became the jellyfish, you know, the extended jellyfish. And God only knows what's going to happen. Now, like somebody like Ray Kurzweil thinks that whole system is going to be able to take off and become its own autonomous artificial intelligence superhuman system, certainly within the realm of the possible. Okay. I think about it more in terms of interface, that we will continue to interface with it, but we will, our mental interface and justification interface systems will get more and more fused with artificial systems. So we'll have chips in our head. We will utilize this to store data. We'll download our stuff on the cloud just by walking around, because we can now, we'll create interfaces between how our brain behaves and how we move the mouse on the screen and all of that. So then we'll become more cyborg-like. Okay. That's what I think is where the technology is really going to, and that's what's going to, and that's going to create a whole nother plane. And then the question is sort of how. But what's my point to you is, yeah, Techne with its information processing capacity, it now becomes autonomous. And that's now it's the, and so as we're going to re-encounter it, and that's why the fifth joint point is going to give rise to such a radically different way of being from this perspective.
Yeah.
And I think the algorithms, it's not that they're not being asked to justify themselves. They are. They're being forced to justify themselves with threat of death. For an algorithm to survive, it has to justify itself. Our problem is the parameters we've given it for justification. An algorithm justifies itself by corporate profit. And what we're teaching it is that is how you survive. You produce corporate profit, you produce clicks at all costs, or we delete you. What we need to do is have some sense of wisdom in how we instruct the algorithms that they will be justified. So for instance, right now, I saw one TED talk that said there's algorithms now that that on Facebook that choose what marketing you're going to get, that the algorithms better at detecting when someone's moving into a manic state than that person, than that person's psychiatrist or that person's family. And so the algorithm can pick up the early signs of Facebook activity, that this person's going to become manic. The algorithm has the history of what this person's mania is. At the moment, what the algorithm naturally has taught itself to do is, these are the people to begin advertising alcohol to, trips to Vegas. These are the people that will suddenly mortgage their house to travel the world. So send them lots of, and the algorithm receives approval because we, at the expense of that human's well-being, we capitalize on their manic state. And the algorithm receives approval, it gets to duplicate, it's used more. However, we could instead tell that algorithm, we're going to delete you when you do that kind of thing because you're sacrificing human well-being. And instead, that algorithm could begin to put up advertisements for things about, you know, mental health awareness, or remember when you're getting manic to check impulsive decisions. We've said the way the corporations are working is we're doing things for money. And that's just ridiculous. It's fiction. We're sacrificing our own well-being for profit.
That's brilliantly said. I completely, so this is when I completely agree, like with Daniel Schmachtenberger and others, that this is what I talk about, also adopt their language of late stage capitalism. Okay. So what the capital machine did, so the capital machine basically symbolizes potential energy and investment acquisition. All right. That's, so money then becomes our symbol of investment acquisition that we then exchange. And capital was about acquiring, well, the capital is the symbol of potential energy. which plugs right into our heart system, which is a behavioral investment system, which can acquire resources. And then that becomes the symbol of that. So you're absolutely right at one level. If you think about the investment justification is to get a return on the investment. That's actually what capital does, is it basically gives our justification lowest common denominator to human exchange to increase investment potential. That's why the market system is an extension of our underlying human psychology. Okay. And basically what it was structured to do was simply to maximize capital for technological power, get the most toys. Okay. And ultimately now it did that really well. All right. And in some ways that's great. Look at all the shit behind me, right? You know, but I think he was on with Eric Weinstein. He made an analogy of what if you could build a supercomputer that could do anything, like say even make paper clips, but it could always do it better. Well, eventually it will create a system that turns the whole world into a paperclip.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And really what capital then is trying to do is it's churning up capital to turn it into, so that you get Jeff Bezos, who can pull more and more capital in together and then direct that. And now the question fundamentally for us is we have to recalibrate what capital is for. Okay. And I don't mean turn everything into money, but we have to recognize that actually our solution, our problem isn't techno control anymore. Our problem is what I call relational value in human connection. It's the soul that needs to be known and valued and contribute positively to other people being known and valued. That's what we fundamentally need. Okay. We need circling connection. We need attachment. We need mirroring. We need known and value engagement. We have to figure out how to redirect that investment.
What is it that we would be present to such that we would re-engage with attachment and relationship and like,
yep.
So right now it's kind of like it seems like the you know, what we're talking about is moving more and more and more, where everything's becoming like hyper contingent, right? Everything's a pure contingency.
Yep.
Right? And so that seems to be because on some level, like we're always like, so as you were just talking about, like the algorithms, right, are basically kind of on
Right.
some level. I had this thought as I was thinking is like, well, from the algorithm's perspective, what are people?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
Like, what are they?
Right.
What is it that they see as people? Right.
They're labor and capital that I can suck up, basically. Yeah. That's what it says. So I'm going to suck your capital or your labor and your attention, and then so that I can translate it into further and further capital for whoever owns the algorithm. Yeah. That's the program. Yeah. And that's what capitalism's set up to do. That's the structure of it. And that to me, my hope is for the fifth joint point is that we wake up to both the brilliance and the limitations of modernity. Okay. I mean, you know, the generalized global capital system is fused with liberal democracy. It's fused with our materialistic science. Okay. And it's fused with a particular global version of reality. I hope we can embrace, in a very much Wilberian sense, I hope we can embrace, include, and transcend into a higher recognized state that control of Techne and getting the most toys and most money and highest status symbols is not the spiritual be all and end all of existence. Yeah. Yeah. So I tell everybody, you know, although I didn't vote for him, but I was like, we are Donald Trump. I think that's what we have to wake up to. You know, one of what can he do for me, at least? What he's done for me is just say, hey, folks, the underlying value structure that we actually now have embraced, he sort of represents. You know, it's a shallow, nihilistic, narcissistic, acquire toys, try to self-promote, you know, and it's a very, to me, it's shallow and dangerous, and it just shows the underbelly of modernity. It shows the shadow side of modernity. And I hope that we can wake up to that and realize that we need to fill that shadow in with something different
Right.
than just a Trumpian defense of I don't want to look at it and I want more toys.
Right. Yeah.
Now there, I heard you using the the word we, the same way I often do to mean humanity, where we need to wake up to this.
That's right.
Let's narrow down though to the we who have awakened to this, because there's a group of people who are aware that this is going on. And I agree with Daniel that this isn't like some people focus on it's got to be roots up, you know, the masses need to awaken. And some people focus on we got to fix top down. Daniel points out it needs to be both. It needs to be fractal. I agree with that. And to bring in Pajot's map for a minute, where he talks about the center, and then he talks about the edges, where there's the dog-headed men and the monsters and the holy fools. That's my position, is I am not a part of society. I live out in the part of the map that says, here there be dragons. I'm a half human, half monster at the borders of reality. And so my purpose in this is to walk with this and to help clean up the margin. I'm looking to work with the people who are suicidal, psychotic, well, also, you know, people like you, of course, as well. But I'm seeing my places to be the one in the gutter. Working at that level of let's clean the gutter up. But each level is going to have to work together. So that's what sorting myself out does. Is anyone who's at the bottom and your life's a disaster, let's ease the pressure in the system. Let's start sorting ourselves out, give the system some breathing room. And now, what do you two have to tell me about what the system or the center of the town is doing at this time to move forward and make use of what we know to midwife the apocalypse properly?
Well, it's interesting, and I liked what you were talking about. I think you said something like earlier about, I think when you were talking about the shaman, you said something about birthing, right? Like something's born, right? You go through this process, right? And then something's born. It's right at that edge of like where the timing is essential. Like if it stays in too longer, the mother dies, right? And if it's if it's born too early, it dies, right? It's this kind of sweet spot. And it's interesting because midwifing, right, is the analogy, or what Socrates called listening, right? That listening as a midwifery. And I think that is in a big way, this is where I'm kind of like, I'm noticing like there's a sense in which it seems like the taking over of the capital, the hyper techne, right? This hyper, right? One of the things that in Heidegger he called that Gestell, right? The just the constant repositioning and positing, right? And optimizing. I think one of the things that can from within Gestell, it doesn't listen, right? It can't listen, right? Because listening has this sense in which, you know, it's funny because it's like if sight has this, you can fill up the space, right, of your visual field. But it's interesting when you think about like acoustical space, it doesn't really fill. You can't fill it up. It can go like it can go infinitely quiet and it go infinitely loud, but there's a way in which it doesn't totally fill up, right? So the quality of spatiality, right, that's very, very different and dynamic than sight. And also it's kind of like when sight just sees the surface of things, right? And therefore, like lots of visual metaphors require a lot of explanation, right? Because you have to account for the surface that you're seeing. Whereas like when I knock on the table, there's a way that the immediacy of the sound actually reveals the interiority of the table, right? And so I think there's something about I just notice my response in my deeper moments, if that's an indication about how to respond at all, right? But like, I think for me, I notice it's more like I'm listening to the whole phenomena, right? And trying to hear something, right? And I think it's precisely I think the first step is to really get that there's something very self-concealing about our time, right? There's something about it that just the example of like, it's only been what 15 years that we've had the whole world right in our back pocket.
Yep.
Like, it's only been like 15 years ago, right? Like that, like literally we're at the point where I could have a thought and in the moment of having it, press a button, broadcast it to the entire world. Like that's like a fundamental
Yep.
that's possible. It's just a fundamental, it's crazy on some level.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is how quickly it disappears, right? How quickly we don't, it's interesting. It's like we don't notice this like incredible thing goes away and becomes transparent because it has this quality of that you live in it,
Right.
Fashions you. Like when you think up in the phone, I had a client who was for a while had a philosophical position at Google, right? And my understanding is that he started to look at Google philosophically, and then they wouldn't he couldn't continue being at Google to have the philosophy. But what he brought up a really good point is that, what is the impact of when the first thing that a billion people do is wake up in the morning and they look at their phone,
Right.
right? It doesn't account for, right, that on some level we find ourselves in the phone and thinking in terms of it, inside of it, right? And then it fashions us. So it's got this self-concealing quality to it.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, like, I think the first thing, and I think on some level this is what we're doing, right, is to hear that the non-contingent has withdrawal, right? It's like it's to actually hear its withdrawal, and that's the way that it's allowing for this. It's like almost like things just arise, right? In a time and space that's no longer questioned. The time and space, the quality of the time and space that sustains it, right, is no longer revealed. So I think that there's something about just kind of, first of all, just hearing that something is gone, right? Something's concealed. And it seems to me that is probably has something to do with the right, maybe perhaps the right relation that makes one available to respond to it, right? Is to get kind of like, one is to see it and see it in all of its utter uncanniness, right? And how much it's just disappeared, and see it in its weirdness. Because that starts to get us into the question of like, well, and it has us take back, I think, what is of genuine question already for us, right? What we give up in that is where, like, all of a sudden we have our algorithms, our products, then look back at us and then produce us and shape us, right? Well, what it does is it kind of banks on a understanding, right, that no longer has to account, it can't account for it. So there's something about, as the philosophers have always kind of pointed out, is like, to be a human being is to be the human being that can question its own being, that is the question of its own being. We can interrogate ourselves.
Right.
But there's also, with that openness, creates the possibility of forgetfulness of that, right? So there's something about kind of recognizing that, like, God, things are just so bizarre, right, in such a short period of time, that we're like heading over a cliff. And there's this way where there's a feeling of where we're just going to head there, right? So there's something about just, I think, listening to it, because I think technologies there's nothing wrong with technology. However, to not notice that our understanding of all that is a technological understanding, is already inframed, right?
Right.
Is a real uncanny situation, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
think that there's like an attuning, because I think I sometimes get I sometimes question the sense of um, I don't know, something wiggles in me sometimes when I think about the kind of the problem solving mode when we look at the world as a
Mhm.
whole,
Mhm.
right? And it's strange because it makes sense because it seems to beg an urgency.
Right. Right.
Like it seems to beg a certain kind of urgency to solve the problem. However, there's something about the urgency that seems part of the very problem itself,
I
right?
agree.
And I don't know how to reconcile that. I could just notice that when I listen to people talk about
Yeah.
kind of solving, there's some way in which it seems like it's within the same frame.
Right. Right.
Kind of like when a fire alarm goes off, there's an urgency, but everyone can't just run.
Yeah.
Right.
It's important not to react to the
Yeah.
urgency
Yeah.
by running. It's important to think clearly, calmly, walk slowly, and to be cooperative. This is
Exactly.
not the time to compete with anyone.
Well,
This
hey,
is
yeah,
work together and move in
exactly.
an orderly fashion.
That's, yeah, I think that, yeah, so that all of that really speaks to me. I love the hearing, listening for the absence. I think that's a really,
Mhm.
because I love like John's project of going back to Socrates and Dialogos. One of my concerns is the change happens so fast that we forget the past. We have to hold on to the good to bridge to the future, you know.
Yeah.
And that's a way in which I hear what you're saying is like, well, what are we losing as through this? And of course a lot of people will comment about that, but it's like we have to listen to that,
Yeah.
you know. And I believe that then awareness is unbelievably key. You know, as a therapist, I talk about the big three of awareness, acceptance, and active change,
Yeah.
and when to do one relative to the other.
Yeah.
Is, you know, and I think we had, for me, I see the 2020s as a hopeful, as an awakening of awareness, you know, and acceptance. And while I think we need to do change, I think we also need to realize this train is going somewhere.
Yeah.
And the future is unprestatable, meaning you can't, you know, so how are you going to solve a problem when you're on a cusp of something that's got an edge that's completely unprestatable already? If you force the issue, if you say fire, you know,
Right.
you're going to contribute, you know, to this. We are on the train. We have to understand where we are. Yes, I think there are icebergs out there, you know. And so, yes, there should be a felt sense of urgency, but what are you going to do? Hit the emergency brake right now, you know, and send everybody flying forward into chaos?
Yeah.
I think that's so. So for me, another thing that you said, Merc, is the fractal piece and the whole sort of the whole landscape. Okay, so as a clinician, you know, for 4 years, I worked with individuals who just made suicide attempts. So in the middle of inner city Philadelphia, you know, it's a pretty brutal world. And seeing everybody's place in the cosmic coordinates is something that, you know, my system orients me towards, you know, and seeing each fractal. One of the reasons it's a garden here is that I see the concept of a garden as a fractal in many ways. Build your own local garden. We have to build the Gaia garden. And in other words, from individual through family to community to state to nation to transnational to global. And our relationship to ourselves is to the digital and the logos and the earth. My belief is that we will find heaven as long as we hold the dialectic relations between those domains in our awareness.
It's interesting as I just was listening to you, like you were like, as you were going through the different levels, I had this sense of like where what was present was like kind of a sense of reverence for the mystery at the
Mhm.
heart of it, right?
Yes.
And like some kind of like, it's almost like what I was watching you gesturally kind of, like you could say, hit that bell of that mystery and then carry the tone up through it, right? I think that's, to me, that whatever that is that can have reverence. I think reverence is a big virtue that I think seems key,
I agree.
right?
I think we need to discover that. That's one of the things I think we need to remember, which we
Yeah,
have lost, you
yeah,
know, and the things that we built as sacred had their place, but I think the next 21st century is going to have a different script for what's sacred than at least this past century did.
yeah. It's kind of like to be able to look, because it's like reverence has this, my understanding of reverence is it has this way, right, of reverence. You could say it's a way of comporting to the world that reveals that which you're in relationship. It
Mm.
reveals the phenomena in its inexhaustibility,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And because it's inexhaustible, it garners a respect, right? So
Mm.
there's a sense of humility that
Right.
also reaches out into the inexhaustible, but
Yes.
then reveals the particular, because you're in relationship to the particular, while to the mystery that's not an absence, right, but a
Mhm.
presence, right?
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
that's precisely the thing that in our technological mode, the algorithm just isn't, it just can't,
Mhm. That's not part of
it's
its
not oriented that
essence.
way,
Yeah,
right?
no doubt.
And
Yeah.
there's something
Yeah.
about like here in it, I think precisely like the you know, whereas religious symbolically, those symbols, right, we're able to like see through them to like to have that kind of resonance, that hold at one point. And now those
Right.
are gone for the, I mean, for the most part. At least
Right.
they don't seem to gather as they once
Right.
did. So it
Yeah.
seems to me that like, well, where does that gathering happen? I think it's something to do, and I think this is where science and is in the movement towards to look at the thing,
Mhm,
right, and to track it and to let it disclose itself and look to the
mhm.
phenomena is precisely where that symbol, there's something about that disclosure that's really important. And this
Amen.
is why I think what you're talking about, this is one of the things that your tree of life work, like the justification process and its emphasis on becoming through relation,
Mhm,
right? That quality of like we become a person
mhm,
through, right, the mutual implicit and explicit justification of other people, right? Like we
mhm.
become agentic through that.
That's right.
I think that that's actually one place that it seems still available to people. It's closing,
Mhm,
but I think this is one of the things I've learned from the existence of circling, right?
mm,
That you can have a practice, right,
mhm,
which
mhm.
is just simply about being with what is in relationship with each other, right? So a
Mhm.
non-contingent,
Right.
like,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
or like being together and revealing how we're already always in relationship that we
Right.
become aware of, right? And that awareness unconceals more of it, and that like cycle of intimacy, it seems like that relationship seems to be the one place where we can still, that still
Mhm.
seems to be available, right?
Amen. Amen.
And
That's why I love the dialogos concept and the circling concept, because we enter into these space internally and horizontally and vertically and in relation. And if
yeah,
we can create systems of justification across scale that foster this relational value and seeing the self and other
yeah,
uh, in this space, then that's the relational field that we can
yeah,
nourish ourselves in.
totally. And that does self in some way, you know, I don't know exactly how to formulate this, but in some way I know when I touch into that with people, there is a quality where I can turn and look at the mountain, right? There
Mm,
is a thou quality to the mountain,
mhm.
at least in the way it
Right. Now
somehow,
there's yeah, it creates a transcendence, right? You know, you're in your space and then you connect and then you connect and then it's a connection. You know,
yeah,
there's that thing.
yeah.
So Hey guys, this was great.
It was really awesome. Thank you.
Really
so
enjoyed the opportunity to connect. And
Well, thank you so much for your time. I loved all of this. I love both of you. You're great. And I look forward to speaking to you both again.
Yeah.
fantastic. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.